part two. Mandy and team were here in January to go over quite a bit of what we're planning to do to modernize the development code and secret that. We want to fast forward to really the part that we didn't get to spend a lot of time discussing as staff and council. It's the streamlining and the potential for more administrative processes. We'll review just briefly the areas of the code that were proposed to change. There didn't seem to be any negative feedback on that, so we'll pursue those as fast as possible, getting our code updated, introducing best practices, and ensuring our compliance with state and federal law, and then get into the meat of the discussion at the end of that last bullet, streamlining development. Just for review, these are the areas of the development code, which is a piece of the city code, but really focused on land use and how the built environment is shaped in Buckeye, the uses that are allowed in each district, how we address signage in our community, but also updating our development, our design standards in particular for different types of housing projects, making sure we're addressing that, ensuring compatibility in our community, and then the platting process, which is also what's called our subdivision code, and then lastly, streamlining. So just a review of what is not on the table for consideration or becoming more administrative. Today, council approves these items. We'll go through them and talk about some examples. These are not changing. Those include annexation, still a requirement through state law and city code that when a property comes in for annexation, staff will review to make sure that the merits and the requirements, both in state and local regulations, are met. An example would have been areas along I-10 that have recently come into the city as far as annexation that preceded what we call entitlement actions, rezones, and general plan amendments. Those will still be council approvals. And then in sequence, next we would often have a general plan amendment, the large map that sits inside of our general plan that dictates through color-coded schemes of what types of uses are allowed in these districts. General plan amendments such as Ventana Ranch Phase 2 that council considered recently to change the general plan designation as a council has authority on that. And then again, rezones, which is what council will see most often from an entitlement perspective, what zoning district is given to a particular set of particular land. Most recently, council did consider a case, the High Street multifamily project on the east side of Verada Way, north of Yuma. So that's an example of one of those types of projects. And then planned area developments. This is another type of a rezone, but it really gives a little bit more depth to what's happening in that project. So planned area development, for example, the mix on Roosevelt, again in that same area as High Street, but it dictates densities, it dictates heights, it dictates other development standards that are above and beyond base code. So council will usually give the planned area development proposal a better look at the proposed elevations, the mixture of uses, the percentage of uses across the site. Buckeye, as you may know, has quite a few planned area developments, community master plans, another way of saying a rezone or a development plan for an area. Verado Festival, those are examples of community master plans. The Floreo at Teravalis, the first phase of Teravalis, was a CMP, community master plan, that council also considered recently. These are all items that are still very much in the purview of council, are not being proposed for changing to an administrative process. And again, I should have left at the beginning of the presentation. Stop me at any time if there's clarification on any of these slides. We don't have many slides to go through, and I can come back to this as needed. Before we talk about sort of the options on the table tonight for council, just a refresher of opportunities for council to see projects that are in process or being considered in the community. Two things in particular. The City of Buckeye requires pre-application conferences, as we call them, PACs, and we usually have 2 sets of those a month. So our intention is to begin introducing those into the bi-weekly updates you get from the city manager's office, a little executive summary of different pre-applications that were submitted to the city. It talks about the proposal of the project, if it's residential, the types of product, the density proposed, if the underlying zoning allows it, will be part of that executive summary. So you get a real early sense of what's being proposed. And again, as a reminder, I think we talked about this before, about a third of projects that come in for pre-application, they choose not to move forward to a formal application for a rezone or a site plan. So some of those may never see the light of day, but at least council's getting a sense of what types of projects are coming before the staff. And then again, we'll continue with what we do today. Every other month, we'll try to get on your calendars to introduce projects that are coming to future consideration at planning and zoning or council, so you get a sense of where projects are at and what we call our development pipeline. You'll see anticipated approval date or consideration dates, I should say, for projects if they've been fleshed out a little more granular type of application. If they provided imagery, we'll be able to share those ahead of those meetings. And again, this is really what the focus is tonight. We'd asked for consideration. We ran out of time in January to talk at length, Mayor. But as it stands today, the legislature has opened up some more opportunities for communities, cities, and towns to move their processes to be a little bit more administrative. The narrative maybe from some of the development industry is part of what's holding residential development back in the valley is the pace of development. We think we're very fast in Buckeye, but certainly there's some opportunities to move things to a little bit more administrative process. The options that these four don't have to be exhaustive, Mayor, but the status quo today, we require preliminary plats and final plats that go through, preliminary plats go through Planning and Zoning Commission, final plats appear on the council consent agenda. Option 2 would be to maybe move those preliminary plats to be more administrative if they're less than 160 acres, which is the threshold which requires a major general plan amendment. So it's 160 acres. Still require P&Z approval for those size projects, but perhaps consider smaller preliminary plats being administrative. Again, considering that final plats could be all administrative if council's getting the opportunity to see those earlier in the process. And then option 3 would be for discussion to move maybe more of that sliding scale to be more administrative. All site plans and all plats perhaps could be administrative. Option 4, moving back in the other direction, this council wants staff to update the codes in such a way that it would require preliminary plats and site plans to also come to the city council for consideration. I want to get out of the way a little bit, Mayor, and let the council discuss this and ask questions of staff, but this is really what we want to focus on with this first item on the workshop agenda.
Okay. Council, any questions or comments to kick off?
The main reason to switch this, is to speed up the process, right? Is that like one of the main reasons?
Mayor, Councilor Beard, that's one of the benefits maybe is to save a little bit of time for applicants, but also there's an element of a final plat, and the city attorney can help me explain this if needed. Final plats have certain purviews of consideration that council has the ability to review against, but certainly there's a little less subjectivity in final plat review as long as it's consistent with the preliminary plat. It tends to be more of an item that council has less purview of evaluating. Site plans, again, oftentimes with a site plan, we're at the stage where the intended use has the ability to go on that land. The zoning is right for it. It's really about making sure that they've met all the requirements of the development code, height, setback, design standards, and parking counts, access, those types of really granular items.
Do you have any other questions related to that?
Not right now.
Okay. Anyone else on council? So just to go into that a little bit deeper, the legislature is making a push toward more efficient development. So eventually, they've made it available for us to have more administrative approvals, and eventually they're headed toward probably just outright requiring that it's going to be administrative approvals moving forward. There's, if you go back to the list of things that we see that are that we have an effect on, that's the annexations, the general plan amendments, rezones, the PADs, and the community master plans, and that's really where we can affect what I guess a project looks like is correct, and the parameters that they're able to build in, taking into account the code.
I'll take that in reverse order, Mayor. Absolutely. So not only what's in the code as far as a design standard and some of the things that make it in, for example, we talked about separation of certain uses that we as a community don't think we need. For example, car washes within a certain radius of other car washes. Those are the types of things we can introduce from a policy perspective into our code. And if we have a consideration for how certain projects should have a minimum standard of appearance, those are the things that make it into our code from a policy perspective. What happens on the land and the uses that are allowed next to each other and within the same district, that is controlled by this Mayor.
And that's what we really have a say over. The things that we think we have a say over that come to council either on a consent agenda or in some other form, or even to P and Z are really already baked because of the rules that are set forth either in this or in our codes. Is that correct? There's a list of those things, the site plan, as long as the site plan is in conformance with the codes, which you all verify that it is, it's more of a, I don't know what the correct term is, but we're not really approving. If we decide at the council meeting when a site plan comes to us that, you know what, we just don't like apartments at this location, as long as the apartments are in conformance with that stuff that is up on the screen there, we really don't have a say, and it meets the code requirements, which is the landscaping, the setbacks, the access in and out, those sorts of things. We really don't have a say at a council level, and really at P and Z, I think, is what we're saying also on those specific things.
Correct, Mayor. The use and its location. It's really, did the staff interpret the regulation on, is the building meeting the architectural standard? Which has a little bit of subjectivity of interpretation of how an apartment should look relative to the district it's in.
Right.
Council would be helping verify or state that it's not. And I think that's one of the opportunities I'm trying to call out is when we start getting those types of materials in through a preliminary or a PAC process, I think called a pre-application process, we'll be able to share those. Those are public record. Council certainly can view those and have an opinion on that as well.
Yeah. And so it's, let's say any one of those coming in, whether it's the final plat or the site plan or any of the things that are really already baked based on our code. If we do make the choice that we're going to not approve it at that meeting, and it's for any other reason that it doesn't conform with this stuff, it's, you know, we don't like apartments in that area, or that's not the restaurant we wanted to see there, or that's not the type of retail we wanted in this specific location, then that is when we get into two issues. One is we start talking to attorneys from the landowner or the developer saying, I've already got the entitlements, and you can say no all you want to, but we're going to find ourselves in court working through some of those issues and on the losing end of it in court. And then the second is having that public meeting, whether it's on a site plan or final plat, and then having the public come in thinking that they have a say at that time. And I think Scott did a really good job, Mr. McCoy did a really good job at conveying this last time. Now we're in a no-win situation where we can't say no to a specific project, but our public is expecting, they're coming to the meeting and expecting us to say no on a site plan or a plat. And then when we don't, then we're the no-good council that let the restaurant we didn't want on that corner happen. But we really don't have to say in it because they've already got the entitlements to build that project. I did a much less better job than you did explaining that the last time. But it's, you get into a no-win political situation with the residents if we continue to do site plans and plats the way we always have.
and I would let Scott speak to the risk that council may incur, but I would just briefly say, correct, it's not really the purview to say whether yes or no, we want this use here. For example, a neighbor says, we'd like you to ask them to build a 25-foot wall so we don't have to see any of it. And it's also not really something that the code would allow or require of that applicant, so it may be unreasonable to ask for some of those things to meet the expectation of the neighbor that's participating in the process at that point.
Is that a fair summary of that?
I appreciate that, Mayor, and you did a fine job of explaining. That's exactly right. I mean, it really turns into what really amounts to an administrative approval. As long as the boxes are checked, the council really doesn't have any discretion. Certainly that's true in the plat context. And then, as it relates to the site plan, I think Brian's right. There's this very narrow kind of subjectivity in terms of, does it meet the intent of the code, but really not a lot of latitude there either. It really turns into an administrative exercise. And the trouble is that you're right. You've got, the use is already approved. You've got a final plat coming in for a use that maybe folks didn't like. They show up at the city council meeting. We've had that happen a couple times. So I can remind you of a couple of Susan Ranch is a perfect example of that. And folks are disapproving of the project. They show up at the final plat thinking that the council has some authority to deny the final plat. And if you were in that situation and I felt confident that they had met all the requirements, I would tell you that you really don't. You cannot deny that final plat. And if you do, you're probably facing some significant liability. So, I think there are many city councils across the valley that have taken the invitation of the legislature to process the plats through an administrative process, just get it off of the city council's deck so that they don't have to deal with that kind of difficult issue. So you've described it exactly right, Mayor.
Does that also save staff time with that administrative approach instead of bringing everything to council?
It sure does.
Staff and customer time frame, preparing the necessary documents.
Much more efficient moving that route. And you take out as you said, it's all administrative, so you're going through the boxes, checking each one, you get that complete, and then you have to wait for an agenda to put that item on. So for 2 weeks or a month in that time frame, that could be time that they're going to work.
Can I ask too? Sorry, go ahead. In recent memory, does anybody have an example of where we didn't approve a final plan or a preliminary plat?
No memory of anything not being approved. A couple of times we talked about a plat and making sure that emergency services were comfortable with the dimensions, and upon clarification that yes, they're very much a part of the review process, the plat proceeded.
So essentially we're doing the administrative process already since we're not denying it. We're really asking any quality questions about the final plat. We're already doing an administrative process already, but we're putting a lot of time frame and hoops in that way. Is that kind of in a nutshell where we're at?
I would say anything that's approved by council is not administrative, but
Right.
essentially
The
all up to
end
that last
decision is the exact
approval,
same.
correct.
We don't get anywhere. We just put roadblocks in the way that create a time frame and work.
Correct.
Because if we were denying left and right preliminary plats or final plats, then there would be an argument to be made to continue what we're doing. But if we're just sending them through, what would be the argument for the other direction?
Fair point. Not since my time here have we denied the final plat.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify what I mean by status quo, today, a minor subdivision of 10 lots or less with no right-of-way dedication are already administrative. And so option 2 says all final plats and larger preliminary plats of certain gross square acreage. And today, site plans of 75,000 square feet or more require planning and zoning approval. So similar opportunity to modify that threshold or keep that threshold the same. We didn't dictate on the side, but council thinks that's a good number. We'd like to hear that feedback.
Why is the 160 acres, why is that called out specifically? What's the thought process on that?
Each community is different, and obviously small projects in other communities and big projects in other communities can be small projects in Buckeye. So 160 acres is the threshold in Buckeye for a large area of land that wants to convert their general plan amendment designation. A major general plan amendment requires greater processes, and so the distinction between what's major and minor or big and small was how we chose 160 acres, so we could be consistent with what a size of land requires a little bit more entry into. But that's also on the table for discussion.
So just going lockstep in a different process, using the numbers and the size is the same, so it's an even.
To make sure there's some consistency, yes.
But does it change the general plan amendments or anything like that still?
No, general plan amendments are still a very thorough process through planning, zoning, and council.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councilman Goodwin.
I think a couple of things. The administrative process eliminates the subjectivity in these improvements. That, you know, that's the inherent guardrails in all of this. That, you know, there's a check boxes that staff goes through to make sure that that they hit these particular touch points. If they don't hit one, if the project doesn't hit one, then staff works for them to make sure they can check that box. So I think when council gets involved, those guide rails get blown away and subjectivity comes into it. And just to echo some of the other comments, that's where we would run into it. So I think the more things we can do administratively, it doesn't take council out of our role as policymakers. Because we help set those guidelines and staff then works through with the projects. So I think it just elevates our importance in this process as a council to make sure we're setting good policies for staff to work with our customers. So, and I've said before, kind of tongue in cheek, we don't need to be picking paint colors. That's not our role. It's set policy and allow good decisions to be made from that. So that's all I have there.
Unless the color is, so I guess to piggyback off of that a little bit more, we have the opportunity to change the policies or the code, not necessarily jump back into doing or trying to contemplate site plans or plats, but if we see something that's not developing the way we want it to, then we can tweak the code to say, you know, we don't, like you had said, the 3 car washes on one major intersection, as an example. We can shift the code or create policy that protects us against something like that, or setbacks that aren't enough. We can create policy that then is part of the checkbox that you all do, or access in and out. If we see that it's not working, then we at the policy level, the 30,000-foot level, can change those items, and then that's what you use as part of your checklist. We don't have to be going through and trying to checklist each one of these site plans and plats on.
Maybe a good example of that, previous council thought best that we have general commerce, GC zoning in a lot of areas of the community, which allows quite a bit of things. At one point, the council at that time said, we don't know that this is right for our community anymore. We've retired that as an opportunity for new projects to rezone to that district, because we thought the new districts we created have a little bit more controls associated with them, tighter list of land uses in each of them. Similarly, if council decided we've been allowing certain heights or something we're comfortable with in certain districts, but we want to scale them back closer we get to residential, those are the types of policy decisions that make it into the code and make sure we're delivering on that vision.
Okay. Okay.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say, just to move the process along a little bit, I think the most efficient is administrative, option number 3, administrative approvals for all site plans and permits. And I think from my perspective, that's where I'd like to begin pushing us along toward.
I agree.
That's really
And with that, we're adjourned.
the next question. I think we had some good feedback on the planning process in particular, Mayor, and I think that's one of the other areas is site plans and where we feel the feedback is on site planning. Today, site plans of gross acreage of over project size of over 75,000 square feet, require planning and zoning to sign off on
You want to modify that threshold then?
We just want feedback on
On whether or not
council
we
likes
set
that, or we've heard a couple pieces of feedback on other alternatives.
I think it's the exact same thing that we're talking about, site plans and, when I'm saying administrative approval for all site plans and plans, that would be both council and P and Z. P and Z has the same items that they're dealing with that we are. They're very limited in what they can contemplate on a site plan or a plat. And as long as it's in conformance with the code, there really isn't a reason to run that through the P and Z process.
Okay. To answer your question, we had no preconceived limit or threshold for site plans. We're just curious what council's feedback was.
I think we've heard clearly from two of you. If there's some other responses we could
So-
take, that would be helpful.
What you're saying is that the staff will approve all the site plans, or would it come to council and we get the final approval?
To date, council sees no site plans. They only see concepts through the bi-monthly meetings and on larger projects. And then they would see, beginning next month, they would see the pre-application materials submitted for site plans. But as proposed, option 3, council still would not see site plans as it is today.
Well, define C, because we can
Excuse me.
review something in there or approve something.
That's a great clarification. I misspoke. Council will see any site plan they want to see. They won't vote and consider a site plan in option 3. As it is today, they do not vote and consider on site plans.
So that's no change.
Yeah, no change on site plans for council.
It would be a change for P and Z to not approve some of the site plans, though.
Correct.
In number 3.
What would be P and Z's job then, just to look at the general plan amendments and things
It would
like
be
that?
the same slide that council is still
Zoning
involved
ahead
in,
of
right?
time, just for clarification.
Correct. They would see all these items as well, as the bulk of the project, but also special plans that the city initiates, the downtown plan, the Gateway Activities Center, which is now called the Landing Plan. They're very much involved in helping to do a lot of that, the discussions and the stakeholder meetings, those as well.
The airport plan, development code updates,
Yep, all of
all of
those.
those items.
Now, we talked a minute ago about what the mayor said about if we don't like something like the use of car washes all in one spot. The comment was that we just changed the ordinance, just for clarification's sake. How long does that process take? Let's say we as a group of 7 decide, hey, we don't like the way this is going. How quickly can staff react lawfully to be able to make that change? And how much can possibly get done while we're changing that for the developers to move quicker than we do?
Great question. Let me tell you that we have an annual process where Buckeye, like a few other communities, not every community, we want to have the best code possible, so we introduce code updates every year. That's our goal. Sometimes, like last year, 4 times a year. So at its fastest, we could probably do one in a couple months, but because we're continually taking feedback, stockpiling it, and then at the end of the year, we initiate an update like we've done here. We want to fix all these sections to make them better, to make them tighter for us, and to answer some of the things that are happening in the marketplace. So we're always working on that. So council in particular has specific items they want staff to work on and address. One of the items was the animal section of our code we looked at last year at the request. We made minor changes, if any. But those are the types of things we'll continually come back every year, at least once a year to council. So we'll make sure we're aggregating those and including those. If there's a particular thing that we think there's a flaw or gap, we can certainly address a one-off text amendment change in a matter of a couple months.
So, and in that couple of months, it's the way it is currently. So if we were trying to keep something from happening, we really probably couldn't, correct?
Maybe you should.
Well,
I'm not 100% certain, Councilmember Yonker, I understand that question. So in the interim, while we implement these potential code modifications that we're discussing today, we would be proceeding under our current code.
Yeah,
And your question is, can you help me understand, try that question again, sir?
no, my question was more of a hypothetical, like if we, the comment was made that if we didn't like the way something was turning out, then we would use codes and ordinances to then stop that moving forward. But if it's already happening, I'm just pointing out the fact that we really can't do anything about it. They've got the zoning, they've got the by right thing, we can't do anything about it. I'm just making it, we can't weaponize our ordinances against a project that's already been submitted, is what I'm saying.
I think that's accurate.
Maybe I could speak to a similar scenario in the building codes. We updated our codes to the 2024 building and fire codes. If a project had submitted their design set under the previous set of standards, we allowed them to continue moving forward while that was being done. Because that was a set of rules that applied to them at the time they initially applied.
Right. I just want to be eyes wide open about how that will look going forward. It doesn't really change anything.
Could you also, you're going to be meeting with people on PACs and discussion about, sometimes we have folks that come in and they say, "Hey, what do you want on a specific corner?" From a policy perspective, you can relay what council is saying from feedback off of the information that you're giving us out of those PACs. So we've got to stop using car wash. People are going to think we're using car wash. But whatever that use is, if you have 3 on a specific corner and we get to the corner and say, you know what, we got to figure out how to put some sort of safeguards in so there's not all of these ending up on the same corner, whatever that is. You're hearing that feedback from council, and then you can relay that to the builders that are coming in the meantime, and then we can work toward those code updates that limit what can be built.
Absolutely, Mayor. Applicants want to have the most successful project possible, so they're really open to feedback before they invested money in design and hiring a team of professionals. So I'll brag on the team a little bit. They've developed one of the best pre-application processes in the Valley. It's one of the best deals for developers to get all that feedback and to let them make the best business decisions possible. So whether it's economic development or our team looking at what's an appropriate mixture of uses or where we think that use would be supported. Sometimes a project will come in and say, I have this great project, I just don't know where I should go. So we can steer them towards the best location. Or in case of projects we're getting quite a bit of in multifamily, belongs in certain areas, it could be a little more sensitive than others. We can help steer projects towards, hey, we know you've applied for here, but have you considered these other locations for the density you're looking for your project? We just know from community feedback and leadership feedback from our council that you could be more successful in these other areas. Or your project has a higher chance for success of rezone if you consider adding these elements to your project.
But back to your hypothetical about 3 or the same thing on the same corner, we can give staff, well, we really don't want to see that kind of thing, but until we change the code, all we've got is persuasion. Right? You can't tell them, no, that's not going to happen. Council won't approve that because that's not part of it. So all you've got is persuasion.
Correct.
To say, you might be more successful over here, but if they want it on that corner, there's nothing we can do about it. It's all codes, correct?
Right. This car wash was a specific example because car wash and self-storage units was something we addressed through, we had a workshop with council, if you recall. What are some pain points you have or some things you hear from your constituents? And that made it into sort of that collection of feedback with, we're seeing an abundance of these and maybe we ought to slow down on them taking up prime real estate or too many in a certain sequence or corridor. And so those are the things that we've asked the community through. We've legislated it in our code. You cannot have this many, or you can't have one within X distance of another. So those things do make it in. It just takes some time. Once that idea is introduced, it's supported by council through a code update. just a matter of months of making those changes.
And, pardon me, Mayor and Councilmember Hagestad, I would make one modification to what you said. I think what you said is true if we are in a context where the developer has by right zoning, right? They've already achieved their entitlement. But if we're in a rezone context and they're looking to move from some, residential zoning to a commercial zoning, and they're pitching a car wash, the city council has the absolute discretion to consider the number of car washes on a quarter and deny that request. So,
Right, but zoning is one of the things we get to continue to see.
correct, correct. But I wasn't clear if we were just talking about the site plan. And if we're in a pack on a site plan and they've got by right zoning, you're right, we're in a persuasion mode.
And it's not on the list, but certainly not just what zoning is on what property, but what our code says is also the purview of council. This is what we've been talking about. If you think you have some pain points and we bring an item back to council and say, we're going to address this pain point with council, and it gets voted and approved, it makes it into the set of standards that we review against the policy.
The good thing about North Buckeye is we get to use south of I-10 as a guinea pig on all these things. See what works and then we'll do the difference there.
Get it right the second time. You got it.
All right.
That's my deal.
Any other feedback, definite feedback? I think that's what staff is looking for here, so if we can just a nod in the right direction, or an ear pull, or something along those lines, saying we're comfortable with.
Feedback is perfect. I think what we've been hearing has been good. I don't know if there's any additional feedback.
And Mayor, this is the proposed timeline. We've got aggregated feedback tonight. We'll bring sort of recommendation to Planning and Zoning Commission next month to update our codes, and then ideally in May, council will consider a final adoption.
Okay. All right, we're not voting, but I'm not hearing any nays, so.
Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
We're here for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, item 2B is presentation and discussion regarding Monroe Avenue interim and future cross-section and streetscape design. And Brian, you're still with us, right?
That's right, Mayor. If you haven't gotten sick of it yet, I'll continue tonight. We'll just roll right through. This is, again, a really short slide presentation intended to get to the meat of a discussion on what we want to see as a community in our main street, the main part of Monroe through downtown. This should be ingrained in your memories by now. I've showed this to you enough times, but out of the downtown specific area plan, DSAP for short, it envisioned one scenario for Monroe as follows: really to maximize pedestrian and dining and seating in downtown and minimize traffic, really push through traffic out of Monroe to really create a special place to enjoy in the evenings and live, work, and play in downtown. Maintaining parallel parking, but the introduction of additional seating areas, less through travel lanes, but more opportunities for pedestrians, and enhanced amenities in downtown, and introducing more shade, and really the truck traffic that used to move through Monroe until recently really push those off to more appropriate through streets. Again, we probably discussed this, each of us with staff. We see downtown, in particular the Monroe project, as it's being called, in 5 stages. The first few steps are already complete. The temporary restriping really is a demonstration or a pilot to see what the community thought, what the staff and council thinks of the existing restriping project, but also introducing additional parking. City Hall East parking lot saw I think upwards of 50 or 60 new stalls with the addition of headed parking on Roosevelt Street. And then most recently, just outside the building here, the landscape demonstration project, which is again, next baby step and iteration of what you can do with downtown if you reconstructed the Monroe section. Just a demonstration of landscaping and introducing some seating in the form of a parklet imagery in the next few slides. The next steps as we envision them as staff is really until you reconstruct Monroe and change where the curbs are, change the width of sidewalks, introduce hardscape and form of pavers or benches and additional landscaping? Can we test the full length of the sections from First or Miller all the way out to Ninth for the park and really give the full breadth of what that Monroe corridor could look like? And then long-term, in the future, through CIP and other types of projects, upgrading the storm drain and fiber and other dry utilities in the Monroe corridor, but also a complete reconstruction of Monroe from First to Ninth. This is, I won't read through the list on the left, but you've been out there, you've seen it, Monroe restriping again as a pilot project. And we talked about this before. One of the, maybe the early impetus reasons for doing this was to get ahead of a proposed legislation that would prohibit cities from changing the number of travel lanes and number of through travel lanes they have in their community, or road dieting as the bill was calling it. So creating an opportunity to have a 2 or 3 lane section now will preserve that for us in the future. So there we have quite a bit of paint. We have gray areas denoting parklets, which is really intended to envision where seating could occur in the future. It's not filled up with picnic tables today, but imagine if you move the curb line, you could create more seating or more areas for pedestrians and other types of activities in downtown. We've hatched out the areas for driveways to preserve and make sure that we don't impede parked cars. We preserve parallel parking in downtown. We created these enhanced crosswalks with the red sort of bricks with inlay look to them. Stage 2 was that demonstration, bringing out these beefier planters, some of these trees and shrubs to say, this isn't the long-term vision. We won't fill up our roadway with planters themselves, but imagine that these are in the ground landscaping and shade trees introduced, and the ability to have that cafe-style seating or an area where you can stay, get out of the sun, especially in the summer. So that project is also done. We limited it to 1 block to gauge feedback and interest. We did have last fall a feedback session in November with the community. What do you think? Do you like the tree species? Here's some imagery of other planters we can use in the interim and the short-term condition for stage 3. Gathered feedback. Also the chicanes, which seem to be a topic that we hear a little bit about. Those were cleaned up through this process and maintained and replanted with some additional material. And then stage 3, really the intention here is once we land on what we think is going to be the ultimate cross-section, how many lanes, how wide is the parking, how wide are the sidewalks, should we go out and add additional plantings across that corridor to really create that special place to start letting the community and those outside of our community know what Buckeye is intending to become as far as creating a special ambiance in downtown. This gives you some renderings of what it could look like, some of these trees in bloom. In an interim condition, again, this isn't intended to be the permanent solution. Imagining how do we go from what we have today to whatever the timeline is that we approve for reconstruction of Monroe, should we choose to do that. And then just a reminder of the type of activity and interest we're trying to create downtown to really bring people down, get them shopping in our stores and eating in the restaurants. Other communities have done similar efforts, taking back, so to speak, some of the pavement that was dedicated to cars and traffic looking to get through your downtown, not necessarily spend time and spend money and stay in downtown. But other communities have found ways similar to us to sort of create that nodes and activity around downtown. These are some examples. Now to maybe the discussion part of the presentation, Mayor. So today we have something similar to this. We've preserved, it's a little wider pavement than this. We have parklet and parking on both sides of the street. And this is again what DSAP had envisioned as the consensus cross-section through the process. Just asking ourselves, what would it look like to have maybe a center turn lane through the section? For many reasons, creating this center turn lane opportunity gives greater access for businesses. Some of the feedback we've been hearing is it's hard to make a left to go where I need to go downtown. It can be more difficult at the busier intersections to be stacked up behind a car. Also, if there's parallel parked cars, it feels like you could be driving a little close, so this gives you an area to sort of scooch away from those parked cars. But also that last bullet point, in conversation with police and fire, public safety services, what would be an ideal solution to create some opportunities to have emergency services get through downtown a little quicker than just a two-lane section. So in staff's opinion, we want to hear what council thinks, but this does create an opportunity to explore, preserving a lot of what the community and the council liked about the downtown specific area plans recommended section, with more pedestrian areas, opportunity for seating, preserving at least some level of parking, but also discouraging trucks and through traffic, and really becoming a place that features and focuses on cars and getting them through downtown, but still slowing traffic down, having those wide amenity areas are still preserved. And just what does it look like in cross-section view? You don't necessarily need to read the numbers on there, but again, 12-foot lane is pretty comfortable for 20, 25 mile an hour traffic, 12-foot center turn lane, 12-foot parking / parklet areas up against the curb. In the short, we're talking about the interim condition now, or long-term condition. Imagine where the parking is today, or the parklet. You could also, this is really a dial you could turn, Mayor and Council. You can make your sidewalks wider, your parking areas smaller. You can, between building face to building face is really what we believe is the best opportunity for the council to sort of direct with feedback today what they'd like to see. So, Mayor, I'm happy to go back to these images, but I just wanted to get to what the questions are. There are really three categories. What is the guidance tonight on the feedback of what's the preference on an ultimate and final section from Monroe through downtown? We stick with the two lanes that are temporarily striped out there today. Is there interest in exploring this 3-lane center turn lane section? Or back on the table, do we want to discuss going back to a 4-lane scenario? And second question there in the middle, if there's some feedback on moving more towards a 3-lane section, do those folks that prefer that section want to consider an interim condition the next 3 to 7 years, restriping Monroe to give the community a sense of being able to pilot what a 3-lane section looks like, rather than to have a 2-lane section out there knowing we're moving towards something else in the future. And we can talk about ballpark costs. I don't have detailed costs today, Mayor, but and then lastly, if there's any feedback on what community engagement looks like here forward, if we choose to move to a 3-lane or other alternative section, staff would propose that out of this workshop, based on feedback, we go out and we have another community workshop. We've had a series of those last year, specifically around Monroe. Present these additional ideas of 3-lane sections, maybe do the dot exercise, get some feedback from the community, engage the property owners and business owners in downtown, specifically on if we move towards an interim or permanent solution, what works specific to their block and in general for Monroe. I'll back up, Mayor. Really, the main topic tonight is, do we have feedback on the existing 2-lane section versus a 3-lane proposal or other alternatives as well?
Get a 3-lane, I'll just put that out there right now. 3 lanes.
1 lane in each direction with the center.
Yeah, the center turn lane, yeah.
Brian, are
Parking
we, oh,
also on street
I'm
parking.
sorry.
Sorry.
We're done.
You want to go for it?
Do we have any data, like, other than anecdotal, people like it, people don't like it, in the current condition?
A preference survey, not a,
No, I mean, because that to me is anecdotal. Either like it or you don't like it. You know, some of what you shared was people, you know, cars having to queue up to make a left-hand turn. How often does that happen? How many cars is it affected? How long, you know, what's the time frame? You also talked about public safety, being, you know, using a 3-lane. You know, what's the change in response time What are these, you know, objective data points? And do we have any of those? Because this is, we made there was significant cost in doing what we did based on the plan that the DSAP. Have we measured what the impact of that is? I realize there's some opportunity for anecdotal information, like it, don't like it, but what are the hard numbers that, again, how long are cars queued up? How many cars are queued up? Is it really impeding traffic? You know, pedestrian access? I think all of those kinds of things. I personally, I'd like to see before we, go ahead and, make changes. Do we have any of that information, or can we collect that information if we can?
Mayor, Councilman Goodman, we can certainly collect it. Bulk of what we have is anecdotal preferences. We did see, and I won't put the police department on the spot, we did see some hard numbers on both the severity and the frequency of vehicular accidents downtown. They had decreased since restricting, since the previous decreased since the previous period when the 4-lane section. I don't have that for you right now in front of you, but that may be the only hard data that I have available now that I can retrieve later. Okay. Come up to the table. My esteemed colleague, Ken Galika, has been very much a part of this, and Mayor, with your permission.
Thank you. Yeah, the data that Brian's referring to, I believe this was for the months of October, November, and December, but basically the month-over-month data compared between 2023 and 2024. I believe the vehicular accidents were down something like 75%, and then the severity was also down. I know police was also tracking average speed of vehicles on Monroe, and that had decreased significantly too, which is a goal. Even though some might view that as inconvenient, the goal was to calm traffic in the area. I don't know if we have data on traffic backing up beyond anecdotes. I just know I'm coming down here on a somewhat regular basis, and occasionally the cars will stack 2 or 3 while somebody's making a left turn, but I haven't seen it much worse than that.
So, along with the safety data, thanks for that. I think some of what I had heard in conversation was there was an economic impact, that some of the businesses are feeling maybe a little bit of stress because of changing traffic flows. Do we have any of that information? And I know this is current state, but is there any significant impact? Significant being a relative term, that impact financially on the businesses that are doing?
I talked to businesses that come and talk to me. Also, I've talked to the residents that live in this area, and they're tired of being bagged up. I've also talked to firemen that drive the fire trucks, policemen that run up and down the street, and they don't like it either. They said it's an inconvenience for them. They've got to slow down trying to get to a call, or going down back roads is not, because they got to stop at every stop sign to make sure they're not allowed to run through them. So the people in the community, they said if they can just get a turn lane down the middle, it would suffice. Keep the speed limit at 25, we're happy with that, but get a turn lane down the middle, that'll survive. Even myself, I was sitting at Circle K trying to get around the corner because someone's waiting for us to make a left-hand turn on 9th Street. So it's just, if you live down here, it's an inconvenience. It may not show in numbers or all that stuff, but the people that live down here are the ones that's here every day. It directly affects their lives, and they just want to turn lane down the middle, and that will suffice what they're looking for.
Let me ask you, Clay, how often do you drive down here? I'm just curious.
On a weekly basis, maybe 2 or 3 days a week.
Okay.
Mr. Rico. How wide is the street?
The existing right-of-way is 80 feet. That's not all pavement.
Building to building, right, is 80 feet?
That's not necessarily the face of the building. There might be a couple feet of privately owned like pavement behind the sidewalk.
We're showing 60 feet up there. Is that generally correct, speaking?
In terms of pavement,
Yes.
this would be the rebuilt section if we were to go in and rebuild Monroe. So this is not necessarily what it would look like in the temporary striped condition. The current width behind curb to face of private property is typically less than 10 feet in most cases. It's probably
So,
closer to
what
5 or
kind of
6.
What kind of a distance then are we talking about? If I had to drive down that whole street and measure it all the way down, what am I talking about as far as curb to curb?
Yeah, so you're about currently about 70 feet of pavement currently with about 5 feet on each side. That's not, that's that sidewalk.
So I'd have plenty of room to put in the 12, 12, and 12 for my lane each direction and 12 feet down the center. So that still only gives me a 36 feet. So I've got plenty of room then to put parking with a reasonable width for parking and not where the door is threatened to get knocked off that people are worried about.
Sure.
I don't know if that's happening or not, but they're worried about it. So we can still have a 12-foot wide parking area, and just as your display shows, you could still have something on the other side for the businesses. So you could reasonably well, with the dimensions that we're getting, you could reasonably well go with the 3 lanes that we've got depicted for the center lane being the permanent center lane out there. Now, how do you do that then when you come to an intersection where you want to dedicate a left turn lane? Can you still do that with the width that you've got? You can. Okay, and that's what I thought you could do. So we could have that permanent center lane because, I'm down here quite a bit. This morning I'm coming here, this afternoon, and there's somebody trying to get into the gas station. He doesn't have a center lane. Now, he only backs up 3 or 4 cars. It's not that big of a deal to me because I'm not worried about 3 or 4 cars. But there are a lot of people that will complain about 3 or 4 cars, 2 or 3 cars. So if it's not that difficult, why don't we just go ahead and do the 3 lanes, do the parking lane on one side, or both if we need to, and go ahead and do this project and not just talk about it. Do it. Go ahead and let's get it out there. Let's spend the money and do the changes. I think that a lot of people are in favor of it. I can't take a vote, but I think a lot of people are in favor.
Are you talking about, when you say spend the money, go ahead and do it, are you, just for clarification, are you talking about restriping or tearing the road out?
No, restriping. And my other question is, when is this drain project down the middle going to happen? 5 or 7 years from now?
It depends. We can have the project management office come speak to that, but it really depends on the time when we get the matching funding. Those sources are really important to the project.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Councilmember Eustace, we work with the flood control district. The flood control district is willing to fund some of that project, but what they're looking for is an updated cost estimate. Plans were done about 15 years ago, so we need to update the plans, get a new cost estimate, get it to the flood control district and see what portion of that they will fund, and then we can come back and say we got partial flood control and partial of us. So we're kind of waiting on that to happen, and then that's about a $27 million project, give or take, so also trying to see if we can fund that in the capital program.
So if that's going to be within the next couple of years, it may not make sense to restripe. But if it's going to be, like we talked about the other day, maybe 7 years out before they get around to doing it, it might well be worth putting the stripe in. I mean, it doesn't make sense to stripe it and tear it up in a year. That dollar-wise doesn't make so much sense. But if it's going to be 5 or 7 years, it may make sense to restripe it if it's what council and residents want.
Can you guys talk a little bit to, that's a $27 million bill, what the other projects are that need to happen? I think there's a utility project in there somewhere, and then there's the actual, the potential of the actual redo of Monroe in that area also. So there's, as Vice Mayor had said, there's a couple of options. One is leave it as it is and then tweak some areas here and there. It sounds like there's some appetite to spend the money to at least restripe and put the center lane down the middle. I know we've had some discussion about if we are going to begin these other projects, the drainage, the utilities, the street redo. There's a pretty good price tag with that, and let's talk through a little bit of that. I don't think that's in the next 2 years. But what does that all entail, and pricing with it?
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, to add on to what he's saying, when we're talking about these utilities, couldn't they all be done at the same time if we tear up the street, put the water lines in and do all that project at the same time?
Absolutely, Mayor, Vice Mayor, I think all those are options on the table. So what we've got programmed is, currently you've got the storm drain project that we need to go out and update the plans and the cost estimate to get to flood control. Once we get it to flood control, they got to then program it into their 5-year capital program of when they might fund it. So whether it's 1 year or the 5-year, that's what we got to get to them to find out. When you talk about the rest of the project, yeah, there's utility issues. There could be water, sewer, fiber, as we talked about, other things that we got to look at as we go in there. And then you've also got the street reconstruction and the landscaping piece at the end. So what we programmed in was next year, fiscal year 26, is doing a design concept report to look at all that. What are all the needs of the water? What's the needs of the sewer? What's the needs of the phasing? When you start talking about doing a 60-inch storm drain with water and sewer, are you closing Monroe for 2 years to do this? And how does that phasing affect the businesses that are down there and the people that are there? So how do you phase that? How do you build it? Do you do east half, west half? Do you do north and south? And how do you go about doing that? And then what's the funding of that? If you're talking, $60, $70 million job to do everything, how do you phase that over time? And can you do everything underground once? Because you might spend, let's say $40 million of underground work and you don't see anything, right? So what does that look like over time? So I think we have a VCR next year to start looking at that and come up with those answers to how you would build it, how you would phase it, and how you would go about doing that.
Next year, meaning 26.
Yes, sir. July 1 of 25. Yes. So be FY 26.
One good thing about Arizona and about downtown Buckeye, even if we close off a block or 2 blocks, we do have parallel streets, just like when we close it down for Parade. So you could actually shut down 2 blocks and 3 blocks and run the parallel streets behind it or on the other sides of it. So it wouldn't necessarily put somebody out of business. They did this in South Phoenix. They did with the rail that they ran south, and they closed, just about shut down some of those businesses down there. But now they're profiting, and it has turned around, and what they projected has come to fruition.
And you're right, we could look at the phasing. Is it block by block? Is it 2 blocks? What's that look like and how you would accomplish that? So there's definitely a lot of questions and a very difficult project to put
We
together.
definitely get the semis off of it if we have them turning and going around the odd blocks. I think they'd find other ways to
They
find
would,
it around.
exactly.
Mayor, in the effort of continuing crowdsourcing of answers, so there was a question earlier from Councilmember Goodman and Susie's was good enough to come to the table. Maybe do we want to update Mayor to answer that?
Yeah, I believe that, Mayor, members of the council, I believe the question was, have we heard any direct feedback on fiscal impacts to the businesses? And so our team has gone out and talked to a number of the businesses. Whether we've gotten specific detail on reduction in revenue and things like that, all we have right now is anecdotal. And so much like some of the other anecdotal information that we had talked about earlier, our team's happy to go out and collect more statistical data. A lot of the time the businesses, we want to be respectful of their revenues, and they may or may not elect to share that information with us. So what we may end up collecting is anecdotal, as yes, I've seen a 10% increase or a 3% decrease or something like that. But we do and have throughout this process gone to the businesses where we understood that there was some concern. We have gone out and tried to speak with them about, was that a result of potentially the striping? Have you seen that corrected, since we've done a lot of outreach on creating that awareness of how to use the road, where to do the parking, and that kind of stuff? Have they seen a correction? Typically, businesses do see revenue impacts in the summer in general in downtown Buckeye, and so we're happy to go out and collect more statistical data. Right now, what we have is kind of what we've been talking about so far, which is anecdotal. I think we're going to go collect some of the additional data that you've requested on stacking and backing up on the road. We can go and collect some of that business data at the same time.
I think on that, that's gonna be very, very hard to quantify any of that. For a multitude of reasons, a couple of those being, if you look from Q4 of '23 to Q4 of '24, you are not gonna get good numbers because you have other businesses that are in there now that are also doing marketing and stuff, that are putting stuff out there that are ancillary to the other. If you didn't do the marketing, you might still benefit from their marketing. So I don't think you're ever gonna get a real straight answer on that. And there's also other things that happen that are completely out of our control that change that. That really has nothing to do with elastomeric on an asphalt driveway. But with all that stuff, with what Jermaine and Curtis were talking about being backed up, I have been backed up on there as well on the road. It's usually during school times, in and out, is what I've noticed the most. I think that the turn lane would be something that would really alleviate that greatly. The other question I have on, if we decide to make any changes on this, what about the mistakes that were made and the durability of the product that we bought? Where's when you look at those, in theory, the fake brick on the intersections was supposed to be something that had a certain look to it. It's just not holding up, and we're only a few months into it. In some places, it's just completely pushed and it's not holding up to what I would expect for what we paid for it, and the process that it's gone through. So what about those things in places where driveways don't line up, and it was designed from not an as-built situation. We were looking at certain things where, like, for instance, in front of 424, the La Casilla building, there's that big long turn lane in the ramp on the sidewalk, but if you turn onto it, you're gonna run into the building, but we put the hash marks in front of it. Some of the stuff that was done because it wasn't done by somebody that had really ever been on the road. And I think that we've kind of got down to that, and that was the mistake that I guess that the city made to do those things. But there's places it straight up doesn't line up. And we also created problems in alleys too, turning in, turn square. So how do we adjust for all of that?
If we were to redo the entire street and do it as a 3-lane, that would give us the opportunity to correct those particular issues. It was a learning process, no doubt. So the other thing I would point out, though, is if you ask staff, I think it's far more likely we're looking 5 to 7 years before complete reconstruction versus 1 to 3 years. It's going to take time for flood control to determine and budget money. It's going to take time for us to determine and budget money as part of our CIP to do the design, to figure out all the tweaks we need to make to that. So again, I think far more likely 5+ years before we were to see the complete reconstruction take place.
Just speaking to the intersection, the pavers specifically, when we do the permanent, if and when we do the permanent rebuild of Monroe, I think we'll have a lot of options that will hold up better over time, actual pavers, brick. We're very limited in the options that are basically glue-on. So what we ended up doing, I thought it looked great at first, but yeah, it is not held up, like you said. I mean, we can study other options, but I'm not sure we're gonna find something that's gonna be a great long-term option, just that way.
The other thing that's been mentioned a couple times is the truck traffic. I know we can't really change much of that, but just for instance, it was a couple days ago, I was turning into the alley by the cafe, and I saw, wasn't gonna be able to make the left turn, and semi came and just completely went through the parking area and around, didn't even, it's like he downshifted and hit the gas at the same time, so it's still a concern with that kind of traffic, and I think that we talk about what it's gonna look like with the landscape and things of that nature. He obviously wouldn't have been able to do that if that was completed. I think that seeing the vision all the way through is wise. Maybe, I would agree with you on the turn lanes and stuff, that we could have done a better job to begin with and been a little bit more patient, and situation that we all think we all understand how we got here, but we still have an issue we need to deal with.
So is there a, instead of a continuous turn lane throughout, is there any thought toward turn lanes at each of the major intersections?
Mayor, I can take that one. There's just so many driveways and streets that, I mean, if you could do maybe major streets, but then people would still, the people that are maybe not happy with it are not necessarily turning into those major streets. Sometimes they're turning into the gas station or whatnot. So I think it would open up, it wouldn't solve the problem. If we think we have a problem now, I don't think it would solve the problem.
So can I add?
Yeah.
Certainly no options are on the table. So if we decided we wanted to have flare out for left turns at 3 of the major intersections through downtown, we could create a design solution. There's a design solution out there for it. And preserve maybe travel lanes, 2 lanes through the middle of the block. And the non-significant intersections maybe don't have a turn lane, but there's still turns allowed. There's an opportunity there. There may be some cost savings involved just doing a few turn-in pockets instead of a full turn.
We do have some of those now. Fourth has the turn lanes, Miller, so it does exist.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe there's opportunity at easy ones to include would be 9th or 5th or
Let me ask another question about if we went to a model basically like with here or the other graph that you had, the design, not that one. Yeah, if we went to something like that, part of the overall plan of the DSAP was to have the parklets. So if that parklet is still available to a business to build something out there, and that's currently designated as parking, are we also contemplating how the business would go through and get approval for that parklet if they wanted to take on that endeavor on their own?
Yes, we have a draft set of standards now. We're anticipating maybe there are some businesses that are excited to introduce some seating in that area that addresses both the aesthetic and also the safety of introducing those in the interim condition which we are in today. The curbs are where they are, but we have areas intended for.
So even if there's a parking spot there, it would still be contemplated for a parklet to be there?
Fair question. I guess that's up for discussion. We intended to use the gray areas where parklets would be, but if a
That's what I'm
business
asking.
chooses in front of their space and
Because that's the way I want to use this as an example. If a business wanted to do a parklet in front of this, you show it on there, you would be taking up what would be parking. Or unless we're talking about making the ones like in the bottom right corner, unless that's designed that way. Or are we talking about those all be parklets?
when we restriped Monroe, contrary to what other cities do, they don't necessarily dictate, here's a parklet, here's a parking spot. So
Right.
that's an opportunity with the restriping to 3-lane sections to leave it all open and let businesses sort of declare, I want a 10-foot picnic table seating area here, but I'm going to reserve the other frontage of my property for parking. That's certainly something we could introduce.
I think that would be wise to move, so then there are places that would make, rather than us deciding this is where parklet should be, let the people that have the skin in the game make that decision.
And that's why we depicted it on this image, to really show that you could intersperse parking and parklets. It's done in a lot of areas of the country. It's a matter of vehicle speeds are really low here because there's so much activity that's easier to dip in and out than it is on a 40-mile-an-hour street.
Does the ultimate design, does it make more sense to push that sidewalk out further toward the travel lanes, and then the parklet areas end up being back toward the business, so that you're not having to walk across the public sidewalk out to
Correct, Mayor. I think that was the natural evolution of what I should have evolved to the discussion. The parklets really, they hit their prime during the interim condition before the curbs are moved.
Yeah.
And they may still have life beyond that on side streets or in parallel parking in the future, but when the curb is widened to either 10 or 12 or 16 foot, that's where the seating should be, up off that 6-inch curb out of the traffic way, where you can have sort of a rail, guardrail there.
And that was the plan in the original DSAP section, was that there would be that wider space up on top of the curb where the restaurants could place some tables out on the sidewalk. Now, by adding the center turn lane, you lose 6 feet on each side of the street for that. So I think the longer term, if we go to this section that's on the screen currently, where you only have 10 feet behind curb, I think you probably still need to maintain the parklets below street level, basically.
So you limit long-term what we're going to be able to execute in the DSAP.
There's trade-offs, yeah.
If only it was 140 feet.
And again, we don't have to declare that 12 foot is the absolute minimum width for lane. We'll certainly work with traffic safety and traffic engineers to say, could we do 11? Could we gain some additional distance for the sidewalks by narrowing either the parking areas or the drive aisles? There's opportunity.
I think John would say, obviously, the narrower the street and turn lane, the slower the traffic. If you have 9-foot lanes, people are gonna really crawl through there because they're not gonna be comfortable going fast.
You don't need a 12-foot yellow center striped off lane either. You don't need 12 feet out there because you're not parking.
Yeah,
You're
the
not
middle
taking out your
turn lane
automobile.
can go down to 10 feet, but I would recommend the outside lane be a little bigger than 12, because you're driving right next to people sitting and eating.
Right.
So we might want that outside through lane to be like 14 feet, just to have that little buffer space of vehicles driving right by people sitting and eating. That's just my suggestion. It can be looked at, maybe instead of 14, maybe it's 13 feet. So they're 11-foot lanes, but still have that condensed
So you
narrow area.
want to take the savings of the center turn lane and
And
give
add
it
it
to
to
the
the outside.
travel lanes rather than take it from the savings from the, see, and from my perspective, I would say no. I would give it to the sidewalks.
And
Either way, but take the 12 in the middle, go to 10, and take that foot you save and give it to the 12-foot 2 lanes. Because driving a car right next to someone sitting is, someone's gonna feel a lot really uncomfortable as sitting and eating and having a car going by at 30 miles an hour.
to clarify, we're talking about the interim condition.
Right.
So in the future, the smart thing maybe would be to have a 2-foot landscape section between the edge of curb and the first fence for seating. So you don't necessarily need 2 feet of travel lane, but you have that.
Some buffer, yes, that's awesome, that's a very good option.
We could also limit any of the parklets that would go in that area to 8 feet. They have to keep X number of feet off the road line from the lane. I mean, there's other ways to skin that cat. I think we're probably getting a little bit too far into the weeds at this point anyhow, so.
Okay.
I think, Mayor, there's a lot of ideas. I think maybe what could be benefited is.
We got no shortage of ideas.
No, I love it. It's great. An opportunity to really kind of have a lot of visuals for a workshop and garner some feedback from the stakeholders downtown and the community and report that back to council as well to help you have, opportunity to make a more informed decision.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
But I'm not turning off the idea machine now. There's more
We'll keep
ideas.
generating. We got lots of really good ideas.
Do we have an idea of cost? If we went to this, what it would cost us to redo what we already done?
The permanent improvements,
No, the interim.
600 grand, I think it was in there.
For the, sorry, my phone was responding to you for me.
What did AI have to say about
this? It said it was going to schedule a workshop. You said for this, the temporary restriping?
Yeah.
I think we ballpark 600,000 to obliterate and stripe first through ninth. There's some opportunities to not redo the hatching and not touch a lot of areas. But again, we haven't gone out and asked for a quote. We're basing that on essentially lane miles of paint and obliteration that we've done.
We can't do that in-house. We have a street department on. We can't stripe a line down the street in-house.
So, council member, we have to obliterate the street and basically start on a blank slate. So that takes a lot of work. We don't have the equipment or the personnel to do that. We have to contract the whole street, obliterate it, and restripe it from scratch. Otherwise, you'll see markings of what things used to be there.
Again, one of the other things, Mayor, we can deliver is maybe a better estimate for that on that cost.
I think it's a good idea. And maybe some options too. I think I'm hearing that staff is in favor of maybe the center lane. It sounds like at least public safety sounds like it's leaning toward that. That's the preferred cross section. We're not asking that here. So it's probably worth another workshop where we're having a better discussion, understanding cost, the implications of this, and then maybe some talk about just doing it at the big intersections, the major cross streets, instead of center lane running through the entire project.
So that would be the addition of 9th, 5th, 2nd. You're just talking about the
And this
third.
is, oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Are you done?
No, but go ahead.
He's gonna just keep
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
And this potential restriping is just an interim condition, right?
Yes, interim conditions of restriping without tearing up any pavement.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back to how I opened all of this, collecting some data on this experiment, the current experiment. How, what are the pluses and deltas on that? And then if we do move to where we're gonna do 3 lanes, use that same set of variables and collect those. So hopefully we're comparing apples to apples. You know, anecdotal's okay as long as it's not one person giving 12 different responses, which tends to happen. So I think it doesn't have to be scientific, but should have some controls around it.
Okay, any other thoughts from council? Okay, all right,
Thank you, Mayor.
thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is adjournment, nothing else.